I guess I never saw it as not bipartisan in the past, because Penny did a pretty good job of keeping things neutral, so I appreciate that. I guess, and maybe you should plan into May, June, the way it functions down there. I've been in there for 2 years, and if you add up all my time spent in Des Moines, it actually equals 3 years, based on what it should have been, so who knows. I guess, Mary Jo's right. First week of the session, the big thing is picking your chair and, seniority, and you get to pick a different seat if you want to and whatnot. That's part of it. Listening to the governor's part of it. Listening to the Supreme Court justice is part of it. They come in and give their condition of their different area speeches. So, I guess personally, priorities. Obviously for me, education is always at the top. I kind of like to, I kind of have my own ed reform plan, if you will. So, you got the governor's plan over here, and you got the Josh Burns plan over here. So, and part of that is because I've been an educator. I've been a teacher. I've been in the classroom, and so, I feel like I got a pretty good handle on what needs to be done. And part of it for me is bringing the rural education to the forefront, and we've got to talk about that. And I think it's either today or tomorrow. You'll see an article come out in the paper from Lee Enterprises. I put together a rural education task force to take a look at what we can do for our small school districts. And there is not a school district in this legislative district that I would not consider a small rural school district. I don't care if you're Cresco or Osage or who you are. Enrollment is definitely an issue, and we've got some things there that we can probably take care of to help ease the burden for them a little bit. Things that we've come up with. We've had 2 meetings so far. 2 of the things that we've come up with is transportation costs. Transportation costs are just absolutely killing these small school districts. You've got declining enrollment, but yet your school district mileage does not decrease, and so you continue to have that issue. And so we're looking at things like maybe some potential weighted funding to help cover those transportation costs and offset those. We're talking about the broadband infrastructure piece. If we want to make sure that schools and students have equity amongst all districts, then we need to have that technology piece in place, so that if you've got a school over here in Riceville and they're having a hard time finding a Spanish teacher, and then you've got a good Spanish teacher over here in Cresco, and maybe it's hard for them to drive back and forth. If you got a good solid broadband infrastructure in place, you can actually broadcast that. You can pipe that into the classroom. So I think that would help provide some equity. And then the other thing we've kind of looked at too is extending the incentives program. A few years ago, the state incentivized school districts to share and to partner up on things like superintendent, transportation directors, the head cooks, things like that. And that expires, and so I signed on to a bill this week that would actually extend that incentivized program, and it would also bring in some new things to that. And one of those would be someone that would deal with kind of some of that mental health, so that you could share that among school districts as well. So we're looking at some things. The other thing is that we need to promote with our small districts is partnerships. And, and it starts with us. It starts with the adults. It's not the kids. The kids have no problem working with each other. It's the parents that are worried about school colors, mascots, things like that, prior history, who beat who in what wrestling match, what football game. We got to get beyond that. And I think that, it starts with us. And so I was at a facility in Grundy Center. It's on Highway 14, north of Grundy Center. And they are bringing 4 school districts together. They've got Appleton and Parkersburg, they got Dike New Hartford, Gladbrook, Rhinebeck, and Grundy Center. And they share teachers. So if you can't offer a high school English class for a senior 12 class, they have a high school teacher from Grundy Center, goes to this outreach center, and she teaches for all 4 school districts at that facility. They've created a common calendar. They've created a common course schedule for the day, which is amazing in itself. And they're sharing resources. It's phenomenal. So, I would like to see us do more of that. And the nice thing is, at the end of the day, they go back to being Grundy Center. They go back to being Appleton and Parkersburg. They still have their individuality, but they have not given up their school in their small communities. Because the minute you lose that school, your town's, it's an economic dead zone. I mean, that's it. I mean, so that's one thing. The other big thing that I'm working on, obviously, is transportation shares of fuel tax. And, you know, I got a camera rolling here, I got folks sitting here. I will make no bones about it. I completely support a fuel tax. We have to. You know, last weekend in the Des Moines Register, they had an article about rural Iowa, and we are not relevant any longer. You know, they're saying that we don't play a part in things. We don't, you know, we don't have a voice on the issues because we got a declining population, things like that. If we don't do something with this infrastructure, they're right. We will become irrelevant. I mean, what company would want to move their business to this area if you got poor infrastructure? So it's an economic development tool. You know, we got to get our goods to town. I mean, there's just all sorts of things that go with that. So for me personally, that fuel tax is a big one. And, you know, there's a lot of people, they think, that are misinformed on the fuel tax. I mean, I never campaigned on raising a tax. But there's a lot of, this is probably the most equitable tax you can find. You've got people from out of state that are paying that fuel tax. It's constitutionally protected. So regardless of who the governor is down the road, they can never scoop it. You can never scoop those dollars. The other thing is, we will not mess with the funding formula. So whatever the formula is today, we will keep that. So I think there's a lot of things there. If you're a supporter of the fuel tax and you're sitting out there right now, the best thing you can do for me is help educate others on what it's about and how important it is for our area. So those are kind of my two big things right now that, I mean, we're already, you know, even though it's the first week, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance. There's a lot of work that already occurred this week on some of those issues. Yes, sir.
Last year you passed a law requiring traffic to move over when there's a county or state vehicle working in the shoulder. Highway Patrol is interpreting that different. You and I have discussed this before. What can be done about that?
Well, I mean, obviously, you know, ironically, Dennis, I get made the transportation share after the fact that we'd had this conversation, but it is on my list of things to talk with Director Trombino. He's the Director of Transportation for the state of Iowa. So he's the head of the DOT. And so that is one of the, and we have a meeting actually scheduled on Tuesday. And he and I have not met face to face yet. But on Tuesday, he and I are going to have a meeting. And that is one of the things on my list to discuss the situation that we had up here and see what we can do to remediate some of those issues.
Also, when there was a CDL licensed person had a crash with bodily injury, they have 48 hours to get a drug test. Why? Why aren't they immediately required to have a drug test?
I can't answer that one for you.
Can
we'll find out.
Find out for you.
Yep. If you see me doing stuff on my iPad, I'm taking notes. I'm not playing Yahtzee or anything. Okay?
Could you just let people know what you're referencing, what happened?
My son worked for the county and was on flat ground, bright sunshiny day, and a semi run over him, and he was badly injured and is still suffering from that. That was on July 3rd.
Okay.
And the truck driver, as of today, has never been charged with anything, or hasn't been to court, or still driving.
And I take from your comments, the gentleman, the semi, was never tested for drugs. Okay. And I don't have a fancy thing he's got. I do my pen.
My questions are for you, Senator. I'm Chris Edgington, a farmer up by St. Couple things. I'd like to hear your opinion of the fuel tax, as I know where Representative Burns stands. And I'm in favor of the fuel tax. I drive those roads every day. We need good roads. But you're also on the Ag and Natural Resources Appropriation Subcommittee. And Secretary Northey is for the nutrient implementation, the voluntary nutrient. He's asked for some more money. The governor appears to be behind that. He's in favor of that. I just want to have your, understanding of what you see coming out of your committee or your subcommittee dealing with those issues.
Well, I think Secretary North is asking for like 2.4 million in the first year. And the nutrient recovery is, if we can have better water quality, why wouldn't we take that step forward? I did have an opportunity to talk to Farm Bureau, actually in Osage a few weeks ago, that gave me a heads up on this. And then ironically, the very next weekend, I was in the Soil Water Conservation Commissioners in Floyd and Mitchell, Chickasaw County, and it was brought up again. So there's been good conversation in regards to that study that Senator Northey's putting forward. And again, if we can help our water quality by improving it, I think that's a good step in the right direction. Senator Northey, of course, will come to our committee and lay out his plan. I guess the question I had for the soil commissioners were, because the cuts we've had for a few years in their budget, I said, would you rather expand what you already have in place, or would you rather have to start this new program? And because that's where I get the feedback from, is from who's utilizing it. And all of them there said they wanted the new program, which is good to hear. So again, I'm looking forward to Senator Northey coming to the committee and giving out his plan.
And your fuel tax stance?
The fuel tax, and I'll keep an open mind on it, but I've said many times I'm not for it. One of the reasons is because as a county supervisor many years ago, it was talking a Time 21 study. And I think fuel tax could be one component, but the biggest surprise is in all these years is we never talked about anything else. With cars getting better gas mileage, and as a county supervisor, Winship County one time, when the fuel tax 4 years ago got high, their road use money wasn't less because people don't drive as much. I'd like to have another conversation of what else we could be doing other than raising taxes. And I haven't heard, other than the pickup plates 4 years ago, I really haven't heard of anything else being discussed. There seem to be things that are out there, but never in a bill that I've seen. I'm not in transportation, so I'm kind of looking forward to see what comes out of that committee, not only on the House side, but the Senate side.
And I can tell you guys, we, in the last 2 years, this issue was kind of, pushed over here, and there was a group of us trying to get this done, and it didn't get done. But I can tell you that the governor had asked for the DOT to go through and look for efficiencies. They did. The efficiencies have been made. They honestly, I don't know what more they could do to cut things. And so, that option I think is off the table now. That's been done. There's been people that have talked about, well, let's take some of this, there's folks that like to call this the surplus in the state of Iowa. I like to call it the fact that Iowans overpaid on taxes. But there's people that have said, well, let's take that money and use that to fund the infrastructure projects. Here's the problem with that. It's not sustainable, okay? So we've got Governor Branstad's going to be in office for 2 more years for sure. We don't know what will happen after that. And if you get a new governor that comes in, maybe that new governor comes in and says, you know what? Last 2 years you've been given $215 million for road infrastructure projects, but that's not my priority because I'm an urban governor. And I got good roads in the urban communities, and I really don't care about some of these rural areas. And so I'm going to take and scoop that money, and I'm going to take and leave you with about $100 million, but we're going to take $115 million and put it over here in this pot because that's where my passion's at. Well, it's not sustainable. And so, at least with the fuel tax, it's a sustainable method. I mean, it's going to be there down the road. It allows supervisors to plan ahead. It allows road builders to plan ahead. It gives them some sort of stability so that we can continue to look down the road. So if we just use stimulus, I'm going to call it stimulus money right now, if we just use that, we don't know what will happen in 2 years. So you start to get a good start on fixing things, and all of a sudden the tap gets shut off. And then what? I've had people and fellow legislators in my caucus that said, I just can't support a fuel tax, and we got to find another way to do it. I'm all ears. What is that other way to do it? If you can find me a magic pot of money, I will gladly go to that magic money tree and take the money from there to pay for this infrastructure problem that we have in the state of Iowa. But until somebody gives me that other solution, this is the number one thing that we have as an option on the table right now. So,
Josh, on that topic, have you had the opportunity to share what in real dollars the fuel tax is and the proportion of the total gas bill and how that's gone down so dramatically over the course of the last 3 decades?
yeah, you know, I mean, we're just starting that process of educating other legislators on this and what the needs are. And we've got some, we have some ideas of how we're going to educate other legislators on this. But I guess, you know, and here's the other unique thing. We have a coalition of groups and organizations in the state of Iowa that have never come together on any topic. I mean, this is a unique situation. We got people that are working together on behalf of the fuel tax that have never seen eye to eye on topics before. The only group that I've had lobby me right now that is opposed to the fuel tax would be Iowans for Tax Relief. And their 2 arguments to me were, you're going to burden college students. If you raise the fuel tax, how are these college students going to pay for that extra money? How many miles a year does a college student put on? You know, if they put 15,000 miles on a year, we're talking about $60 extra a year. And I don't even think they put 15,000 miles on a year. There's some of us in this room that don't put 15,000 miles on a year. So, you know, some of their points of why not to do this are weak. They're weak at best. You know, and again, it's kind of odd that, you know, you look at party affiliation here, and I'm saying, hey, we got to get this done. So.
Betty?
In looking at the gas tax and so on, there's 2 questions I have. One of them, and Mary Jo, you talked about you'd be interested in looking at other ways, and Josh said, you said that that was about the only thing you could see right now was the raising the gas tax. Vehicle licensure would be one thing that I would be interested in. And then the other thing that you mentioned, you said that you would not change the road use, the formula. Well, how can you be sure that won't be changed with the urban legislators having so much clout and the rural having a lot less clout? Are you assured that that formula will never be changed? Because you know, that's been something that's been in question for years, and we've been worried about the change, you know, yeah.
And that's a valid comment, because we did the pickup plates, that was in the Time 21 study, and they did change the formula. So the revenue that comes back from the pickup plates is under a different formula than the original formula for the gas tax. So that was changed. And there is a rumbling that I heard before I went down to session, I haven't heard since I've been down to session, that you're right. But talk about gas taxes, rumbling about changing the formula. And the concern is there are a lot of urban senators and representatives down there. And I would not be supportive of that. So again, talking about gas tax, you're right, that there's a lot of other points we have to look at also.
Well, let me just mention, I mean, the pickup deal, it used to be that that was a lower rate because they were used mainly by the agriculture industry. Now, I mean, people are buying huge pickups, and the people in town, I mean, that's, you know, the equity between pickup licenses and car licenses is kind of ridiculous. I mean, you didn't raise it enough. You know, you look at, I guess we go according to weight, don't we? I know what I pay for my car license, $345 a year, you know, for the first, 10 years, and then it goes down. Well, you know, what are these big pickups what are they paying? You raised it, is it just equal across the board? From $35 to $75 or something, I don't know.
No, that's higher than that.
Well, I mean, it's nowhere near, you know.
Well, and honestly, Betty, I mean, like right now, this fuel tax bill is going to be about fuel tax. That's it. And so, you know, the minute somebody starts talking about changing a formula or changing something else in it, and we start trying to mess with the registration fees in this bill, it blows up and it's done.
Yeah.
Okay? So we want to start talking about registration fees, and we want to talk about some of those other things. That's going to have to be a separate bill, because this bill has got to be pure. It has got to be simply about the fuel tax. It has to be, I mean, that's what this coalition is focused in on, Now, we want to go and, hey, let's get this done first, and then let's come over here and let's start looking at maybe some of these registrations. The next phase of this, we're going to have to take a look at some other things like, in the state of Iowa, if these electric vehicles ever take off. We're going to have to take a look at that. Right now in the state of Iowa, and I can't remember what it is, they told me a couple weeks ago, on the total number of electric vehicles registered in the state of Iowa, it's about that much. It just really is a moot point right now. But if that were to start to take off in the future, we will have to take a look at that. The other thing we're going to have to take a look at, and I did get some reassurance this week, is like the compressed natural gas. If we start having semis utilizing a different fuel, the nice thing is, in the wording of the fuel tax, it talks about anything that's used to propel a vehicle. So whoever was the person that wrote that up was looking into the future. So we're covered on anything that they, so maybe there's something, if we get to the fact that we're talking about electric cars, maybe if there are batteries that are being used to propel that vehicle, the tax may be different on purchasing those batteries or what have you for those vehicles. But for right now, that bill is focused on that. I understand your concerns with the formula and stuff, but I will tell you this, the minute somebody starts wanting to tweak that, it blows this whole thing up and it is done. So even the chambers have backed off on the funding formula and they're leaving it alone.
Josh,
Yes, sir.
pull out the calculator just for some raw numbers. If we assume that,
Can we just see if is there anyone else, because I got 30 minutes, anyone else have a burning issue? We can get back to this.
go ahead.
Okay, and then we can get back to you on that.
Hi, Josh.
Yes, sir.
Senator. My name is Jared Melman. I have a small business in the southern part of the county. As you know, there's probably a few people at the court or at the Capitol building today that are there for the purpose of the Second Amendment and standing up and protecting that. When I found out that you guys were going to be here, I decided I'm not going to Des Moines. I'm going to stay here and talk to my representatives. What are your views on the Second Amendment? Do you see anything that is on the table right now as far as limiting magazine capacities or the types of weapons available? I consider myself a patriot and a real strong advocate of the Second Amendment, and the shall not be infringed is important to me. What do you guys see, or what do you have to say about that issue?
I can be honest with you that we have not discussed this at all within our caucus yet. This has not come up. I have not, and again, we're in the first week. But, there has been some other pieces of legislation I've already read through and stuff, but there's nothing so far that I've seen that talks about anything in changing the guns. I will say that I think there's a wait and see attitude a little bit, taking a look at what the federal government's talking about and what changes they propose. And then I think maybe you would see a reaction at more of a state level. So I think that there's a few folks on a wait and see type of thing right now versus, I think they're taking a reactive approach to this, I guess is where I'm seeing this go. I don't know. I don't know where this discussion will go. I don't know if we'll have that discussion at the state level this session. Again, I think it depends a lot on what the federal government does.
And our caucus has not discussed it at all either, so I think I'll follow what Josh is saying too. We're kind of like wait and see what the federal government's doing. There has been no discussion.
And I know there was a legislator in Des Moines prior to the session starting, Representative Dan Waldbauer, and he had some things that went viral on him, and it's a classic example of foot and mouth disease, and he admits that. Dan actually, I work a lot with him and stuff. I talked to him the first day of the session about some of the things he said. There's more to that story a little bit than maybe what. He's not going to come to your door and take your guns or anything like that. He's not proposing any legislation. He was caught in a moment where the Newtown tragedy occurred. He was with his grandkids and got a call from the local news reporter, and it, like the rest of us sitting here, when we heard about that tragedy, and if you've got children, it made you sick to your stomach. Just to think about losing a child that way. So, he kind of had a knee-jerk reaction in that interview and whatnot, and it's been kind of hard on him and his family, I can tell you that, when you're getting death threats every day and things like that. It's not exactly the greatest, and you know, that's not really the way that you advocate your issues either, is to threaten to kill a legislator. So, you know, I think that, you know, and then Dan's not of my party, but I will defend him on this one, that, you know what, he admits that it was a foot and mouth type of thing. So if you hear that there's a House legislator that wants to come to your door and take your guns, it's been kind of blown out of proportion, and that news reporter in that local paper saw an opportunity, I think, to get himself recognized at a national level by kind of stirring the pot a little bit on that one. So that's not happening.
Stan?
On property taxes, the governor has advocated for a reduction of both commercial and industrial. And I have no problem with the commercial, especially for the smaller communities here. The big box stores and that have an unfair advantage of purchasing power and so forth. But I'd like to know what your stance is on giving the big box stores 100% break, just like he's advocating for the smaller stores. Could we put a cap on, let's say 400,000, anything above that there is no break? I mean, they can get the first 400,000. But more importantly, on industrial, you know, back in 1991, machinery and equipment was taken off. We're having a new plant out here right outside of Osage coming in, and most of that plant is not building and land. It's machinery and equipment. Over 3/4 of it is machinery and equipment. And so they've already got their big break on industrial. We've dealt with a number of smaller companies coming here to Mitchell County wanting to locate. The first thing that they ask is not, what is your property taxes? That is not a big concern. They're more interested in what kind of workforce do you have? How reliable is it? There's all kinds of those issues. It isn't property taxes. And the other thing, the governor's advocating a 2% growth, which is fine and dandy, except if he doesn't advocate a floor, at some point in time, farm ground, or the productivity formula, is going to go down again. It went down in 2004, and it fell 20%. It took us 5 years in order to make that up, just to break even to what we were beforehand. And it took the residential and the rest to make up that reduction. And so if you're going to have limited to a 2% growth, you have to also put a 2% floor. And I'd like your comments on that, please.
Well, I think the first thing is that's the governor's plan.
Well, yes.
We haven't rolled out a House plan, and we haven't seen a Senate plan. So I think what people have to remember, the governor can say whatever he wants to over here in terms of his plans, but that's not the gospel, and that's not what's going to happen. So, you know, that's why
I'm asking what's going to happen.
Well, and we, you know, we've got, in my case, we got Representative Tom Sands that's currently working on that. I have no idea what he's going to roll out yet. I have not seen his plan yet, so I don't know what his plan is going to be. You know, and I think that in the governor's state of the, or condition of the state speech, he was much more self-conscious of local government and what his property tax reform ideas did to local government than he probably was 2 years ago. So I think he's gotten the message to be more self-conscious about the effects that it has on local government. So, you know, I think that I think he's reduced his aggressiveness on it, but again, that's his plan, and we'll see what Representative Sands rolls out for our plan. I don't know what Senator Bolco's got going.
Yes, Senator Bolco's probably looking over the plan of the governor's right now, and he sits, of course, chairs Ways and Means, and he'll have an option of addressing, because, you know, our intent for the last 3 years now will be commercial property tax reform. And we want to make sure, and the Senate side, we're doing the best we can, not shift the tax burden from commercial onto residential and ag. And Representative Burns, he did say that, you know, last year the governor's plan came out, he wanted a 40% reduction across the board of commercial. And you're right, the big box people, I'm not gonna say names but you know what we're talking about. To backfill all that was a concern, because if we did not have the money, there would have been a definite shift onto residential and ag, especially at home in rural Iowa. So here, Governor Branson did back off and said a 40% reduction across the board. He's looking at 20, but it comes with stipulations that you also pointed out, a 2% ceiling cap, co-mingling all three groups now. And I think the first thing we have to do is look at what numbers that means and how that affects people at home. So we just got his wish list, and we have to look at it, address it, and start looking at numbers and how it affects people, and then sit down with Senator Bolcom and start talking to him too, and see what his intents are.
Joe Rao, I'm from Worth County, so I'm new to your district senator, Josh, I met before. And I farm, I work in industry, in the biofuel industry, and I'm an EMT and fire department officer for my local fire service. That being said, first and foremost, I'm a father. I have a child that is in kindergarten right now in the Central Springs School District. And the tragedy out east and all the stir and talk that's come of that definitely hits home. And I've talked with my local school principal about what options he has available and plans to protect a child such as mine. And obviously he couldn't go into great detail, but we had a very good conversation. And from that, in my own mind, I was thinking, you know, we have these zones that are so-called gun-free zones. And all that's done is allowed people to come into a room packed full of victims, and they know no one can defend them. Within the school system, they are so restricted and hamstrung that they have basically no options unless they have the funding in the local community to have a school resource officer on the police force to actually have somebody there that could put a stop to a tragedy like that. And talking with him, he's hamstringed from even having teachers that have a background or have an interest in achieving some other self-defense type classes from having any means of defending themselves. Wondering your thoughts from a state level of any ways you can help the principal out, the school district, the superintendents, give them some tools to work with. Tools such as, and this was the principal's idea even, of a teacher that might have even like a bear spray. Now obviously a bear spray versus a firearm is not an equal opportunity, but it's something. They can't even have that, he said, given the current regulations on them. And by bear spray, I'm talking like a pepper spray canister that can shoot out 20, 30 foot and hopefully incapacitate a person long enough that children could escape out of the area. But I'd be really interested in your thoughts on giving our schools some other options to defend our children if we truly do mean to protect our children. They are our future. Well, and I guess just 1 second quick little point is I hesitate any legislation you see coming out that would hamstring our first responders and fire departments any more than it's happened in the last couple of years. The regulations with the mandatory training hours, you got to keep in mind, you're mandating something for a volunteer to do. We have a serious, serious issue on my department getting new people on. You might have someone that has a little interest, when you tell them all the training hours they have to go to, on top of the calls and everything else, people turn away.
I agree with you on that. And I think I've even read in the Rice Recorder over the last few months that they're putting almost an ad in the paper saying we need people to help us out, and completely understandable there. I think back to the Newtown tragedy, the day after that happened, I have a group of superintendents and principals that I put together that's kind of like a group email group that, like if we're talking about educational issues in Des Moines, I'll send them out an email and say, what do you guys think about this? You know, give me some feedback on this. Well, the day after I sent them the same email saying, what do we do? You know, what are you seeing in your school districts? and what can we do better to provide safety for children? Because obviously, a parent of 3 children in school, I mean, you almost feel so sick the next day that you don't even want to send your kids to school because you're so worried about, are they protected? And so obviously that question is there. And so, you know, I thought it was interesting. I got an email back from the superintendent from North Iowa Buffalo Center over there, and he had made a phone call to his local law enforcement and said, you know, we're kind of out in the sticks here. If we had a situation at our school, how long would it take for you to get a deputy or a sheriff to our school? 20 minutes. Anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes if they're not in the vicinity. 15 to 20 minutes is a long time to be defenseless in a school system. So I think you have different models out there in which we really do need to address some things. You know, this individual out there in Newtown, the doors were locked, they had a great security system, they had a great emergency contingency plan, and it still happened. And so I think that we got to have some conversation about what can we do to provide a diversion or something in which you could save lives. And you know, and some of these superintendents, they did. I had some superintendents that said, you know what, we would be willing to, you know, go to some sort of training, and maybe an administrator could have some sort of a handgun or something that would help, that they could keep in a vault if they needed to go get it or something. Some of them were strongly opposed to any sort of an idea. But we did have quite a few that sent me an email back that said pepper spray, taser gun, you know, the bear spray, something that we could use that could try to create a diversion or somehow incapacitate this person so that we could protect lives. We've got to have that conversation, you know, and it's more than just obviously locking the front doors to the school, because in this case, they still got in. You know, and I think some of our schools too, I've talked to some teachers, and we've got some school districts in which the doors to the room, they can't lock them. They can't shut their door and lock it to the outside hallway. You know, so I think there's some simple things we could do too that, you know, some sort of protection, some sort of line of defense for these teachers and these students. And it could be as simple as changing your doors and your locks. And I know there's fire marshal things, but I taught at Mesa City High School, and we had drug dogs come through a lot. And we'd shut our doors when you were told there was a lockdown, and nobody could get into your classroom. And they were solid steel doors. You know what? I felt pretty secure when that type of situation happened. So, you know, I think we got some things that we need to have a conversation about. Obviously, putting a law enforcement individual in every school, when you have communities that don't even have a local police officer in their town, I don't know how you do that. There's just not enough to go around. I mean, it just, and the funding, I don't know how you fund that either. So I think we do have to have that conversation about what do we provide that school district with that can provide them something, some line of defense.
And I have the same conversations with most of my people, whether superintendents, principals, sometimes the teachers. And I had a teacher actually email me and tell me that in their school, she's not there anymore, but they had to go outside the classroom to lock the door from the outside to pull the shut and run back in the inside. So just little safety things, like, you know, there's a conversation about that. We're doing a big ed reform. We're talking about education, and I think what we should be doing is not only talk about education with the process of teaching to make our schools better, but also how to make them safe. And I think what Josh was saying, we have to have that conversation about how to do both. It was a tragedy. It opened a lot of people's eyes, and it made people think about their kids. And so again, we need to do not only education from one standpoint of education, but also safety of our kids while they're at school. One thing I want to say, I used to be an EMT. I was an EMT in Cresco for 10 years, and yes, it's changed over the course of time, greatly changed. I am proposing a bill right now that hopefully at least offset the cost of initial training or initial certification. I'm getting one drafted as we speak to hopefully help that, because rural Iowa is suffering from all EMS type of services. We're getting older and we're getting busy, and sometimes we forget we still need those core services in our areas. So, and I'll be happy to have any conversations with you in that regard with those type of services. So, yes.
Good morning. I'm Andy Eastwood, Director of the Mental Health Center in North Iowa. I'm glad you both mentioned mental health, and I want to speak to the other side of this. You know, there's a safety within the school from the kind of tragedy that we've seen. But what we know from mental health research is that 90% of the people we see in the public mental health system have a trauma history. The majority of that trauma history starts in childhood. And what we know about that is that with these tragedies, hurt people hurt people. So the key that we see is early identification through screening and then early treatment. And there are programs out there that we could use and implement fairly readily that won't take a lot of expense. We just need to connect the dots and have the right programs. There are programs such as mental health first aid, and I know that the recommendations coming from the White House will include that. That's an excellent program. And if everyone, you know, could be trained in mental health first aid, that would be great. But there are others that are specifically targeted for schools, such as signs of suicide and signs of self-harm. And these are programs that integrate the school environment around paying attention to kids, knowing when these kids are having problems. In addition to that, you know, we have the makings of a system for screening kids already. We have nurses in public health. We have them in schools and wherever there is a nurse, primary care, public health, empowerment programs. Those nurses are able to do a screening, a quick mental health screening. So with every interaction that they have with a kid at every age, there's an opportunity to screen.
So, excuse me, your comments is connect the dots.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about all these programs that we have out there,
Mm-hmm.
and the quick and easy screening. So what are we missing then? In connecting the dots, as you said.
Well, I think part of the problem is creating an access to mental health that isn't scary to parents. It's got to be accessible. It's got to be a system that empowers the parent and respects the parent so that they're not afraid of losing their kid. That's the first thing. But it's also about making sure that the screening tools are used routinely and result in a referral with the parents on board to the right resources quickly and be able to provide those assessments that then need to be done, those evaluations, and then get the right kind of services. There's a program nationally that's now been closed down, but it was hailed as a great thing. It was Teen Screen. But it only happens for the 9th graders once a year, and that's it. And the national data on that is that those teen screens for suicide are, even when a kid reaches the red zone, which means they're actively thought about suicide, most of those kids do not see a provider for 6 months after that screening. So we've got to change that. We've got to have quick access. And if you would indulge me, I'd like to say something about mental health centers, because this year is the 60th year of the legislation in Iowa that created the mental health centers. And our mental health center has been going for 58 years. But there are mental health centers across the state that are in financial crisis and looking at the possibility of closing down. And we've been the core of community mental health for that period of time. And one issue that I think needs to be addressed is the way the state funds the mental health centers. There are many mental health centers, because of the cost reporting system, that are waiting for money for services that they provided in 2009. In our case, we've got the equivalent of 4 months' payroll that is still in a bank account in Magellan that IME, which is the key to getting that money, is locking up because of this cost reporting process. And this is not uncommon. There are lots of providers, not just mental health providers, but across the state, that have got money that it's their money that they can't unlock through IME. And the consequence of that is a cash flow problem and mental health centers having to go to the bank for a line of credit. This is a crazy, crazy system, a crazy way to run a mental health system, if you excuse the pun.
So you're telling us the mental health center has the tools, but are not really able to implement them because of funding, problems getting the funding?
Well, if they close their doors, then you've lost a part of the safety net.
And this is a real short on tools as well. I mean, not only funding, but I mean, I've heard that there's a lack of people even going into the profession. It's hard to get people that, to take those jobs or to even, put them into the funnel, into the pipeline at least. And I can tell you this, that on the House side, and I'm not sure who on the Senate side is with this, but on the House side, we have an individual by Representative David Heaton, and he does a wonderful job. I mean, that guy, I don't know if he ever leaves the Capitol building, and I think it's aged him enormously because he has taken on this battle, and he's trying. I mean, he really is trying, and it's such a complicated system to get your arms around. And I feel if he ever stopped being a legislator, I have a fear we would really, really go backwards. So I mean, I know they're working on it. I just heard this week some conversations that he was having with some folks around me about this. It's definitely, I think it's moved higher on the radar because of some of the things that we've encountered. But again, I think you're right. I think that funding component it's tough.
And one of the biggest things too, is that the legislature for years, even for my time, was having meetings because they want to address the mental health needs of Iowa. We had a mental health budget as supervisor that was locked in from a cost and cost amount. We were locked in. I think Howard County we could only spend $900,000 give or take. That amount of dollar was locked in for 16 years. And during that time, of course, needs go up, and what doesn't go up over 14, 15, 16 years. So that's why we did the mental health redesign last year, which we have to address right now too, to talk to people and see where they're at and where they're at financially. So again, many different levels when it comes to mental health, so the payment, the services, and now with the redesign. And I actually sat on the Mental Health Behavioral Science Board in Decorah for a few years, so and they struggled for a while also, same concerns. See, Betty, have your hand up.
Well, this is in line with what the gentleman said. I had written about Magellan too, and Magellan is a managed care entity under contract to the state, but I understand that there's thought of giving them an extended contract, a 1 year only for the next 2 years. I happen to sit on the board at Prairie Ridge. It's a treatment addiction center, and actually, 2 years ago, there was parity for substance abuse and mental health. And now we're all concerned about block grant funding and so on, and how can you speak to any of that, and how, the state says, well, we have X number, you're in good shape now. We want to know what's going to happen to our services, because many people have co-occurring disorders. And everybody's going to have to find a medical home and so on. And we're really concerned. Block grant funding is our major source of funding at Prairie Ridge. I mean, we do get good, we have third-party pay, but that is a big chunk each year of our services. And I don't know how the mental health system works. I was on that board years ago, but do they get block grant funding from the state too?
No.
There's no, not from the state.
As fee for service, yeah.
There's a small block grant from the feds that is administered through the state, but it is very small compared to our expenses.
Well, I just wondered if either of you could speak to what's going to happen with this funding stream and Magellan and so on.
I'll be honest with you, Betty. This is completely out of my wheelhouse when we start to get into the mental. I mean, I don't sit on any of those committees. I can't give you any insight to that whatsoever.
Well, it's something I'd be interested in, and you just kind of, taking a look. And Mary Jo, could you speak to that?
Well, most of that funding comes to the appropriation of the Human Services budget, which I do not sit on either. And like I said, with the changes we did with the mental health system as a whole, I know there's going to be talking about funding. Actually, right now, I'm getting calls from our CPCs of the area saying that, you know, they knew with they need an interim funding source before even June 30th comes up. So we'll be talking about that amount of money right away. In the block grant funding, I wasn't aware of that, Betty, so I'm glad you brought that up. I'll be watching that and talking to some senators about that. And again, that's what we're here for. We like to hear what's going on and then double check and go down, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, a lot of the people that fall under the block grant funding are people that have very little or no source of income, you know, maybe don't have a job and so on, need help.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
And I never understood either from years ago why they separated out substance abuse from all the mental health money in our budgets. Our local budgets, I never really understood that, so.
Maybe, Betty, we can convince Senator Reagan to come back and do a guest appearance, because she's pretty good at that stuff.
Thank you.
We all get our one issue. My one issue I just want to make you and everyone else aware of is that Iowa now has 628 impaired waterways. I did print out, this is Mitchell County's impaired waterways in Mitchell County. There is a draft report. This happens every other year. And DNR is looking for comments on it. So I'm not going to say too much more than that. Be aware of it. You can go to the DNR website and read it over. And maybe it has to do with some of that, you know, like we need to increase the REAP funding and funding to increase the riparian barriers so that our waterways aren't full of fecal contaminants and bacterial contaminants and other things that make them unsafe and unhealthy.
Well, I can tell you that Secretary Norley was extremely happy with the funding proposals that Governor Branstad gave for the waterways side of things. So I think there was like 6.8 million or something allocated or proposed over the next 2 years, which was a significant amount compared to what he's had over the previous 2 years. So I do know that he's very pleased with that. You know, in Howard County, we've got an individual over there by the name of Neil Schaefer that's done some amazing things. So there's some models out there that we can follow, and he's done a good job of working with our agricultural community and kind of getting a lot of cool projects done over there. So.
And the money we're talking about is that nutrient recovery that we talked about, but it's over a period of 5 years. Initially, again, it's 2.4 in this next budget. So anything we can make our waterways better, we're definitely going to look at it.
And one other little comment with that $1 billion surplus that I keep reading about, you know, rather than everybody getting a $50 tax rebate, I would rather see the state looking at putting some money back into programs that really had to be cut when the budget was bad in education and like all of these EMT training, whatever, all these other things that we could do with that money that would help all Iowans, more than like you give me a $50 rebate or something, you know, that's all. Any last question? I don't want to overextend their time. I really want to thank everyone for coming. Next month we meet on the 16th, I think it is, in Riceville at the Public Library. So come again. We'll have more of an idea what's going to be happening in this legislative session. They'll have more things to say, and we'll probably have more things to comment on. And I'd like to thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And now the picture.
Now the picture.
Oh, yeah,
Are we going to sing happy birthday first, though?
Oh, yeah. We should sing happy birthday to my mom. For her birthday, I hosted this legislative forum. She's 92 today.
Yay. Who's going to
Frances Morris.
Happy
birthday to you. Happy birthday to